In July 1518, a woman by the name of Frau Trofea started dancing fervently on the streets of Strasbourg in modern-day France. In itself, it's not so strange, even in medieval Europe, to find someone dancing, but in this case her dance went on for over a week until she collapsed, and over the course of 2 months over 400 people joined her in uncontrollable, sometimes 3-week-long dancing crazes. People danced until they collapsed and literally died. Some sources say it cost the lives to over 15 people a day between July and September 1518. This time in history, we investigate the peculiar dancing plague of 1518. On the streets of Strasbourg on a July summer day in 1518, Frau Trofea erupted in an uncontrollable dance. The dance lasted until she collapsed, before she resumed after she had some rest, claiming she just couldn't stop. Soon, over 30 others had joined her, claiming to be caught by the virus. When August came, over 400 people assumably had fallen victim to this dancing craze, and the city of Strasbourg had to take measures. City officials held an emergency meeting with physicians to find a cure to the dancing plague. Physicians, who in those times operated vastly different than they do nowadays, blamed hot blood as the cause of the plague. Medieval medicinal science in Western Europe was mostly centered around the so-called theory of humors, stating that humans consist of 4 humors or principal fluids, which were each connected to a temper, such as melancholy, an organ, a weather condition, element, season, and more. These humors needed to be in correct balance for the person to heal, which was done by diet, bloodletting, exercise, medicinal plants, surgeries, and even the use of leeches. Hot blood was the idea that the blood in one's body was so hot it would overheat the brain and cause for strange behaviors, and eventually death. Hot blood was usually treated by bloodletting, basically draining someone of their blood. But as the people could not sit still, physicians thought bloodletting wasn't possible, and so they proposed something different, namely to just let them dance it off. So the city council built a stage, hired professional musicians for the dancers, and they even hired bouncers to physically help the dancers when they collapsed, either to catch them, carry them away, or to hold them up so they could continue dancing when they were fatigued. Sources differ, but it was most probably a guild house where this was all set up. The idea backfired though, because while the dancing plague started off with some 30 to 40 dancers in July, after setting up a guild hall with live musicians, hundreds of people joined in. Again, sources differ, but it is quite certain that at some point over 400 people were dancing. Other sources state that at its peak, 15 people a day were dying from the dancing plague. But that seems like a bit of a stretch. So, the city now had a full hall with hundreds of people who could not stop dancing and were collapsing en masse, and apparently dancing it off as the physicians suggested did not work. So more rigorous measures were taken, and the cause was found elsewhere. Firstly, the city dismantled the musicians and stage where people were dancing. They forbade live music with an exception of string music for weddings and put a hefty fine on anyone found dancing. Those who kept dancing were ordered to go to the shrine of Saint Vitus, who was often attributed to healing illnesses. Several groups were brought to a nearby shrine by horse-drawn carts, where a priest awaited them to hold a mass. The people were given red shoes sprinkled with holy water and painted with crosses. They also had to undergo a ritual consisting of incantations and incense. This ritual seemed to be helping as the plague came to a halt, and by September things were back to normal. The fact that this dancing plague took place is quite certain, as various sources from the time mention it, such as records by the city of Strasbourg, local and regional chronicles, a sort of predecessor to newspapers, and records held by religious institutes. However, the details are a bit fuzzy. The exact amount of people struck by the plague varies wildly, and a lot of sources do not mention any deaths at all, but do mention a couple of strokes and heart attack-like occurrences. It is unsure if anyone actually danced themselves to death during the plague, unlike many tellings of this story claim. So what caused this sudden, unstoppable dancing? There are actually two theories. Firstly, there is the theory of food poisoning, a theory which has been linked with other historical anomalies, such as witch trials and paranormal sightings. Specifically, a fungal poisoning called ergotism is considered. Ergot fungi commonly grow on grains as rye, which were used to make porridge and bake bread. They were probably the most important source of food for medieval Europeans. It was also an expensive good, so it is thought that merchants or farmers would mix good and bad batches of grain to hide the fungi and still sell the grain. The fungi are psychoactive and actually structurally correlated to lysergic acid diethylamide. I believe you can figure out which drug that is. Although not an unthinkable theory that a bad batch of grain made it into the city and poisoned a large part of the population, it does not necessarily explain why the plague went on for nearly 3 months and how it was cured by spiritual means. Also, the fact that everyone would have reacted the same to a fungal poisoning is not very plausible. And so another theory suggested by John Waller, historian at Michigan State University, in the Lancet, is a case of mass stress-induced psychosis, sometimes also referred to as mass hysteria or mass psychogenic illness. Funnily enough, the Strasbourg dancing plague was not a self-contained incident. Throughout the Middle Ages, various of these dancing plagues had popped up. Between the 11th and the 17th centuries, cases are known to have happened in modern-day Germany, Italy, France, the Netherlands and Belgium. The Strasbourg incident seems to be the most documented one though, and also one where the authorities spent the most time on solving the problem. These outbreaks of mass hysteria were probably a combination of hardships such as wars, rough and unhygienic living conditions, poor diets, unclean drinking water, and lots of stress. I have dropped the link to the original article in the Lancet about possible causes in the description of this video if you are interested. I hope you enjoyed this trip to Strasbourg and see you next time in history.